moment after 9 o'clock. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Weiss,
Here.
Ms. Pachetti,
Here.
Ms. Elder,
Here.
Mr. Sleesman.
Yep.
We have a quorum.
Great, thank you. Ms. Birdsong Terry is running a few minutes late, but she got word that we should go ahead and begin. So with that, first item is approving the minutes of the meeting of August 12, 2025. You had drafts in your materials. Any comments or corrections? If not, is there a motion to approve?
So moved, Pachetti.
Second, Sleesman.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Minutes passed. All right. The next item is the primary topic today, and this is the internal audit report presentation for the third quarter 2025. And with that, I will turn it over to executive directors. All yours, Mr. Garofoli.
Thank you, Mayor Weiss, members of the Audit Committee, senior staff, and folks online. My name's Tony Garofoli. I'm the Executive Director of Internal Audit, and I'm joined by my internal audit staff here, and we'll be presenting the results of our third quarter 2025 internal audit activities. Next slide, please. Thank you. Our agenda for today is we're going to start out with just an update for the Audit Committee on the Institute of International Audit standards. It's required that we present this to the committee to keep you updated in terms of changes to our standards and what we abide by. We're also going to present, as you requested, an update on third quarter activities for the rail car replacement infrastructure audit activities. And then staff will then present different aspects of activities during our third quarter internal audit efforts. Next slide. To begin with, the International Professional Practice Framework topical requirements. Next slide. The IIA topical requirements are mandatory guidelines that auditors must follow when auditing high-risk areas. And as we are looking at different projects, we will apply these standards, okay? And you'll see at the bottom of the slide, there are 4 topical requirements that the IIA has put out or is in progress of putting out. They include cybersecurity, third party, organizational resilience, and organizational behavior. You can see that the first 2 are effective in 2026. We are choosing to adopt those now, okay? Those are published and we are integrating those into our audit program. So we're going to tell you a little bit about those. Next slide. The first is cybersecurity, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Andrew Scott, our IT auditor, and he's going to give you some details on that.
Good morning, Chair Weiss, members of the Audit Committee. Each of the topical requirements is broken down into a series of topics, really. So for cybersecurity, our first topic is governance and accountability, and this is really taking a look at that there are clear roles and responsibilities defined in the cybersecurity environment, and that reporting lines for oversight have been defined. So we have responsible staff, we have responsible management, directors, et cetera, et cetera. This will also take a look at the definitions of high-level items, so things that we have, incident response plans, disaster recovery setups, and things along those lines. The next topic is cybersecurity risk management, and this is to ensure that cyber risk is integrated into our enterprise risk management and is aligned with our organizational strategy. So that's as we continue to move forward as an organization and we continue onboarding third parties, as we onboard third parties, as we implement new applications, upgrade, et cetera, that cyber risks are taken into account and then we move into the controls to account for those. So the controls and resilience to ensure that we have safeguards in place for our critical systems as well as incident detection and recovery. So like I mentioned, We'll have controls such as antivirus, all the various system monitoring, incident detection, how we're detecting those incidents, how we're monitoring ongoing incidents, how we're managing those incidents as they go on, and recovery. So if there is any sort of cyber incident, how are we going through? How are we recovering that? How are we getting back to a normal state of operations? Then we have third-party risk. And this is to be integrated into all of our vendor and supply chain contracts to ensure that any exposures are identified and managed. And we do this by taking a look at making sure that all of our vendors have appropriate certifications, reports. So we primarily look for SOC 2 reports for security reporting, ISO certifications, and these are all things that are independently validated by third-party auditors for each of the vendors. And then finally, we have independent assurance, and that's so we, internal audit, are able to provide objective assurance for the recommendations for continuous improvement. So this is not just a one-time thing. It's as we continue to look at any system by system by system, we are able to independently assure that these controls are taking place, and we provide recommendations and follow up on those recommendations to make sure that our posture for cybersecurity is the best it can be.
Thank you, Andrew. You'll notice the third-party risk, the fourth bullet. The IIA expands on that as many systems are moving to cloud technology, and certainly we have many ongoing contracts. You'll see in the next slide, please. One before this. There you go. Thank you. The third party. So another topical requirement, mandatory guidance for us. Some good news is that the RTA is well ahead of this guidance in terms of each of these categories. Clear ownership and oversight of third-party risk management. We have segregation of duties here, a procurement department, project management, oversight from our executive leadership, oversight from our board, risk identification and due diligence. So there's a requirement to assess both those inherent risks and residual risks when we're doing an audit engagement, okay? Monitoring and performance management. Certainly there's many groups of employees here who are monitoring contract compliance. Again, this is mature at the RTA. Contractual safeguards. Our legal department and our procurement department have worked hard to ensure that our contract templates include required clauses, controls, including audit rights and regulatory compliance. So again, way ahead of this. And then independent assurance. Not only we have a responsibility to evaluate effectiveness, okay, of controls and oversight practices, but the state auditor does that. Outside groups do that. Our management does that. So there's a lot of eyes on it. So again, we wanted to share with you mandatory topical requirements, effective next year, but we're doing early implementation. Next slide. Leading into our next discussion, the Institute also did a risk assessment with all of our peer groups, okay? Not so much in transit, but across North America. And each year they put out this result, the 2026 Risk in Focus Survey. This is to inform our risk assessment and our audit plan. And you can see that the top 5 risks here, number 1, cybersecurity. You can see why they have that topical requirement. Mandatory guidance on how to audit that. Digital disruption, certainly something that every organization, including ours, has to be aware of. Regulatory change speaks for itself. Business resilience, the financial health of the RTA. We'll be looking at audits in 2026 to evaluate our financial health and ways we can help with cost containment. And then this geopolitical macro uncertainty. An example of that are the tariffs that the RTA is subject to and that we're all reacting to here, certainly our management group. Again, this will inform our risk. I want to say that in December, next month, I'm meeting with the transit peer group. APTA has a committee of internal audit professionals my peers throughout the country. And we're going to be looking at risks specific to transit. So we'll overlay this risk survey with our own risk survey as we prepare to plan for the 2026 internal audit plan. Next slide, please. Oh, okay, we're back in business. Yep. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Steven Zimmerman, our audit manager, who's going to share with you the results of our mid-year risk assessment and those efforts.
Thank you, Tony. Good morning, Audit Chair Weiss, members of the Audit Committee, General Manager India Birdsong Terry. I'm going to take us through a presentation now of the mid-year risk assessment that the Internal Audit Department performed. So just a little framework for us, referring to the Global Internal Audit Standards, Standard 9.4 Internal Audit Plan states that an internal audit plan must be dynamic and updated timely in response to changes in the organization's business, risk operations, programs, systems, controls, and organizational culture. The IAA further goes on to provide some considerations for implementation, stating that while there's a minimum requirement that a risk assessment be performed annually, if the organization's environment is sufficiently dynamic, we may need to update the plan as frequently as every 6 months, quarterly, or even monthly. For the Internal Audit Department, GCRTA, we opt to update it every 6 months, so this is our mid-year update. So a little methodology into how we perform a mid-year risk assessment. So first we start by identifying what are the population of projects that are not started for the remainder of the year. And I'll remind the committee that our audit plan year goes from March through February. March being the approval of the new audit plan, and then February being the last month of that plan. So this Q3 and Q4 are relative to our audit plan year. Once we identify those projects that haven't been started yet, we might look to see projects that might be eligible for deferral due to various organizational factors. And I'll share a little later about some reasons we might choose to defer a project. Then we have to identify all the potential new projects that we might want to add to the audit plan. These can come from various sources. One is every time we complete an audit engagement, we perform an internal lessons learned review where we identify risks, initiatives, things that we might want to audit on the next audit cycle, as well as when we might want to follow up on that audit in the future time period. We also look to new or changing GCRTA projects and initiatives, and then any major risks that might have popped up that are impacting the organization. Then we'll rank both new and old projects according to a risk factor categorization model, which I'll share in the next slide. And then we'll evaluate what are the remaining unencumbered audit hours for reassignment. So how many hours do we have left to assign to the auditors so that we can complete what we've already committed to finish, as well as to finish out the year. And then when we do that, we also consider, well, what kind of hour estimates for existing projects might need reallocated to match reality. So that could be either increase or decrease of hours assigned to a project. And then once we've done that, we'll assign all the hours that are available for assignment in a risk-ranked order. So highest risk items get assigned hours first, and then when we run out of hours, that's the end of the risk ranking assignment. So any projects that didn't get hours assigned are candidates for next year. So these are the 15 risk factor categories that we evaluate when we're looking at prioritization of the various projects for the mid-year risk assessment. I'm not going to read through all of them, but I'll maybe highlight a few that I think might be interesting to the board. So one, materiality, the magnitude of revenue and expense. We often use this to evaluate risk associated with contracts, construction projects. What's the total value of that construction project or that contract? Management competency, performance, and turnover, and I want to focus on turnover in this case. So whenever there's turnover in a business process or a department, that's a particularly ripe opportunity to perform an audit, because usually when there's new leadership in a particular department, that's a good time to reflect on how have we been performing work and what's some opportunities for change in the future. Another one is susceptibility to fraud. So we have a requirement per our standards that we must consider fraud in every audit engagement, so we also consider that for our risk assessment. And then finally, degree of regulatory involvement. As we're all aware, the RTA is subject to various regulatory agencies and compliance obligations, so we absolutely consider that in our risk assessment activities. So what was the outcome? Well, we have 13 new projects. 10 projects were removed, and these projects were deferred due to what we'll call organizational factors. Let me rephrase. Some of those projects may be deferred due to organizational factors such as a project delay or a change in management priority. And then other projects were removed because they had low risk ranking relative to the new projects that we added from our risk ranking outcome. But I want to provide some assurance that just because a project might not make it on this year's mid-year audit plan, that does not mean it leaves our risk universe. We will consider it again in February when we do our new audit plan and into future years. And then finally, we did have 12 existing projects where our allocations were adjusted. So this is pages 1 and 2 of the 3 pages of the audit plan, and the committee should have a copy of this in front of them, and then you can also view them hopefully on your screen in a little greater detail. Just orientation to our legend here. So in the green that is highlighted across the row, that's a new project that was added. The red with a strike through across the rows, that's an existing project that's been removed. And then if there's just highlighting on the hours with an up or down arrow, that's an existing project that either had an increase or decrease in hours from the previous plan that was approved at the beginning of the year. So I will pause here. There's another page, page 3. If there's any questions, comments from the board on our mid-year proposed audit plan.
You know, and while you're looking at that plan, I just want to reiterate that our standards require that when we have these types of changes, that we bring it back to the audit committee and seek your approval as we plan to modify the plan for the remainder of the year. So as Stephen said, you know, as you look at some of these projects, do you have any questions related to them that we could answer?
Do you have on hand the reason for some of these?
If you,
Yes.
we do. If you had a question, we can answer.
The fair capping being removed, we know what else.
So the fair capping is being deferred because fair capping won't be ready for audit before the end of the plan year.
Right.
So we certainly intend to do fair capping. It's going to be a 2026 project.
We will do a comprehensive fair collection audit, which will include fair capping, but we'll look at our entire fair collection process when we go about this in 26, just giving management a chance to implement it.
Okay.
It's a process question, if I could.
Please.
Yeah, I was, just from reading the materials beforehand, I assumed that you would kind of give an explanation of why some were being cut, why some were being added. So I just want to, will you be able to give a high-level overview of that, or?
We could, yeah.
Sure, if you prefer, we can go through.
I think that would be helpful, yeah. Thank you.
Maybe you would, first of all, I should mention that in preparation for the meeting, Mr. Garofoli and I went through all of these, so in a kind of a more deeper dive. But I understand the request, and maybe if nothing else, just by category.
It doesn't have to be detailed. Just an overview would be helpful.
The kinds of things that triggered.
Sure.
I can start.
Yeah, if you don't, we have a
So
micro copy of the
yeah, so
plan.
first, customer information. This was an advisory project where we were going to coordinate with the customer experience team. The customer experience team has been very busy since their inception. However, they're not quite ready for this advisory engagement for evaluating customer feedback and sending people out to interact with customers. So we're going to wait until next year to perform that advisory engagement. We added the enterprise resource planning RFP to account for hours that one of our auditors, Andrew Scott, is engaged as a non-voting member on that procurement panel. We've also added IT policies and procedures and TVM CSK replacement again to capture hours that he is engaged in either procurement panel or just advisory work in the IT policy and procedure development. For accident review committee rating and prioritization, that one was removed because we had completed an audit on accident reviews and recommended that when the accident review committee makes change or evaluates an accident, that they rate those accidents based on severity. They declined to adopt that recommendation, so it can't be evaluated because they did not adopt that particular recommendation. Exit interview process was removed because it was a lower risk relative to other projects on our plan, so that is going to re-enter the audit universe for next year. We discussed fair capping. Independent cost estimates was added because we identified a couple projects from recent audits where independent cost estimates varied from the proposed amounts from vendors, so we wanted to look at the process for that.
You're seeing that in some of your contracts where we estimate and then their proposal comes in higher? So we thought we'd take a look at how our folks are doing those estimates.
Miscellaneous receipts process is being deferred because we're working on an accounts payable audit right now, and we want to do a full accounts receivable audit in 26, which will include miscellaneous receipts. Outage scheduling, another project that was added because we identified in a recent audit, and you'll see in our completed projects for this quarter, outages that are affecting time schedules for construction projects leading to delays.
Just to expand on that, so an outage is provided to our engineering group or our power and weight track group so they can do work on the right-of-way. So taking a look at the process for how outages are made aware and how they're approved. If an outage is removed, it may cost the authority some money.
Succession planning ranked lower relative to other projects, so it's added back to our risk universe for 26. Travel policy and expenditures is a distinct audit from the travel reimbursement process. So the travel reimbursement is just the daily activity that we do where we review travel for compliance and send back to travelers. For this audit, we want to look at the overall control environment, trends over time, patterns and expenses, types of trips to ultimately improve the process. So more of a true assurance engagement.
The industry changes so much. Should we have to change our rules, to align with those industry changes?
Sorry, is there anything that triggered that?
I'm sorry?
Is there anything that triggered that?
Well, as folks are sharing not sharing, the required workflow is that we will provide assurance per the board's request before the general manager signs off and is paid. So we're just looking at, there are certainly some, it just changes so much with what hotels are charging, airlines are charging, different classifications of seats and so forth. So just to be able to provide management some assurance and some recommendations should we need to change those policies or procedures.
If I can just piggyback, good morning, everybody. With all of the financial sort of constraints that we have that we're going to be looking at, particularly over the next year plus, travel is one of those items that we're going to also begin to pull back on a little bit more. We saw the same kind of thing when COVID came into play and folks started to do more things virtually and start to look for alternatives to be able to participate without necessarily hopping on flights. Also giving some of the government activities that are going on. I know that I have found that you can be delayed or increase your travel expenditure by having to have additional nights. For example, if your flight doesn't actually leave on time and miss connections and that kind of thing. So I do think that this travel advisory from Audit will be helpful in trying to figure out exactly how we can start to kind of shed costs that way as well.
Use of Ubers versus public transportation.
All right, moving on to page 2, under rail car replacement, the Brook Park Rail Shop modifications, we were unsure if that project was going to start this year, so it is underway, so we were always planning to audit that, so that was added. The Buy America domestic content monitoring, that's where we are monitoring as the rail car proceeds through its build, that Siemens, which at the pre-award stage had shared with us their plan to procure parts, actually executes that plan and maintains within the Buy America compliance requirements, which is greater than 70% domestic components. Under information technology, the applicant tracking system implementation is delayed from management, might potentially be a candidate for discontinuation entirely. So while that's in its current stage of delay, we're not going to be able to audit it in 2025. And then role-based access control. We did an identity and access management audit last year, and we recommended that IT adopt a role-based access control environment. They're aware of this recommendation, it's a best practice, but they're not currently in a position that they can implement that, so we're unable to perform an audit engagement on that topic.
A little bit of detail. So role-based access, the principle of least privilege when you access a system. So aligning with your job description, aligning it with your specific duties rather than giving you, full access to a system. Under continuous audit, we removed the dependent benefit eligibility script development for 2 reasons. One is that we had recently completed an audit on dependent eligibility, and as Tony will share much later in their presentation, currently undergoing a claims engagement where we've co-sourced with an outside vendor to do an evaluation of our claims. But the other reason we've chosen to defer this audit is we are resourcing Randy Bowles, our IT specialist auditor, to engage in traditional audits in addition to his continuous audit work. So some of the hours that we're going to work on this script development, he's performing regular audit engagements as well, which has been helpful because then it helps inform the continuous audit script development as he gains experience in those other types of audits. All right, and then on the 3rd page,
Under the contract audits, this was just an omission, the fiber optic line replacement, and we wanted to make sure it was included here because we did complete that project this quarter. This was one of those projects that was subject to significant delays due to the unavailability of track outages.
And COVID.
Access records and retention holding costs. This was a new project add related to a pivot from customer experience as we completed a significant quantity of customer experience audits to financial health with some concerns over the costs associated with holding records in our access records retention vendor past their records retention date. Background checks, that was added to our, that was a new add to our audit plan. Although we did add that before the hiring freeze was announced. So maybe I'll ask the board if they have feedback on that particular item. And then we did not break out these particular Buy Americas of the pre versus post for the CNG coach replacement and the paratransit vehicle replacement. Both of those coaches, the post delivery is going to be occurring now. So we want to ensure that we capture hours for that.
Our manufacturers accelerated their production schedules, made us aware that those vehicles were in production, so we needed to move those up in our plan.
And then finally, landscaping contracts. It was meant to be a follow-up audit where we had done the maintenance of the right-of-way through the city of Shaker Heights, where we wanted to look at then the GCRT procured landscaping agreements to see landscaping on the Shaker line versus the rest of the authority, but partially due to the cost of the value of the contract, it did not risk high relative to the other projects, so that will re-enter our risk universe. That takes us through the end.
Maybe just a clarification, Mr. Carafoli. The total number of hours stays the same, correct?
Yes, the hours stayed the same. We actually developed our plan based upon the number of available hours, person hours that we have, accounting for vacations and so forth. And certainly, if we wanted to make sure we had proper risk coverage, so if our risk coverage demanded more hours, as we learned with our healthcare claims audit, then we did consult with or co-source with an outside vendor to help us with that audit. So again, aligning hours with risk coverage, and we did not have a change in hours. As you see in the bottom here, we do have 2,000 hours of contingency available, whether that be for special requests or to fill in where perhaps a project takes a little bit longer than we had anticipated.
And I'll just circle back to background checks because one thing I should mention is that even though there might be a slowdown in hiring for administrative positions, we're not stopping hiring for operators, mechanics, people that are keeping the business moving. So background checks remain important for those positions. So even in our current environment, it's an audit worth doing.
Okay, no further. Oh,
Sorry.
no, go ahead.
Give a second if anybody else had questions, but would you mind just going back to the accident review
Sure.
for a couple minutes, just so I understand? So from the explanation that I heard, you were not able to perform it because we are not ranking accidents by severity. I'd just like to understand that a little more in terms of what our plans are.
I'd like to talk about that. I'm comfortable talking about it, but it was your engagement.
So, yeah, and I just want to understand what our plans are going forward, just to make sure we have an understanding of, how it's trending over time and how we're handling those.
So the process with accidents, they all go to an accident review committee, and they determine if they were preventable or non-preventable. If they are preventable, the operator has to go through retraining. And there's delays with that. They have to process those accidents. They have to schedule people for retraining. They have to get available. The trainers have to be available. So we recommended that they rank the accidents by severity so they can get more severe ones in for training earlier. So that would have been what the audit was, but they're not implementing that right now, so that won't be happening.
Is that just a timing question, or is that a substantive decision? I recognize it's not you're not responsible for it, but
when we present recommendations to management, management gives us a response that goes into the audit report, and many times, a majority of times, management accepts our audit recommendation, but they have the option to say, we're not going to go with your audit recommendation. We're going to do something else that addresses the same risk. So there's a bit of negotiation there. So they opted not to accept our ranking proposal and instead just prioritize retrains differently so that they didn't have a large gap between the accident and the retraining, which gets at the same risk that operators are retrained as quickly as possible before they're out driving again.
If I may, let me ask another question before Doc goes, and Doc may be wanting to answer this particular question. Given the change, I think we have to have twofold. We have to have the explanation to supplant what you're talking about, which I'm assuming Doc is going to give, to make sure that we get to the answer and the solution. So let me punt to you, and then let me punt back to audit to determine if there's going to be a transfer of hours at some point for the new mechanism that's elected by safety, to make sure that we still have an audit in place that tracks for the actual accident review process. Is there a plan to adjust and pivot on the audit side to kind of acquiesce to the decision that management made so that we don't lose the audit? And I think that's what I hear as far as the function. If there's a change on the management scope, is there also a congruent pivot by audit, or do we close out the audit completely?
If I could share some more detail. So prior to this audit, we did a review of the Accident Review Committee, their makeup, how accidents are brought forth to them for review, what stakeholders are on that committee, how they evaluate them, how they prioritize them. And we certainly learned through our audit that operators are subject to training. So when we closed that audit and then moved to, well, let's make sure they're trained. So we opened up a new audit with how often are they trained, when are they trained before they're put back into service? So that's more of what this audit addressed. And with that, I'll let Dr. Kaver say a few words.
Thank you, Mr. Garofoli. Good morning, Chair Weiss, member of the committee, and those at home. I'm Flonse Kaver, the Chief Operating Officer. And so just want to say that we're supportive of the audit that was done. This particular question that you asked, Ms. Pachetti, was related to the categorization. The risk was that operators would have an elongated period of time that they weren't trained. And our mitigation was to make sure that there's not an elongated period of time that they're not trained. So at every 2 weeks, I get a report from Wendy's team that provides for me the number of operators who have not had their retraining. That number is in the single digits, most often not more than 5 at each bus garage. And so we've managed to process to make sure that we don't have a risk of an operator who's had an accident and has not been retrained with the full retraining. And so as Mr. Garofoli and other members of his team has mentioned, there may be a recommendation as to how to do it, and the team sometimes comes back with a different way of mitigating the risk. And so there is a concerted effort between Wendy's training team and our districts to make sure that that risk, first of all, is transparent to all, and then we make sure that we don't get to a place where there's been a long period of time.
Quick piggy. Oh, I'm sorry.
Can I add to our objective is not to be prescriptive in our recommendations, is to raise the awareness for the risk. And certainly management has their experience and skills to develop controls and or mitigations to address the risk. So as far as we're concerned, when we make a recommendation, it's a suggestion to address a risk. And as Dr. Kaver said, he has his own set of mitigations.
If I can request that, I'm missing the titling of it. I'm looking through my list. Where is it? What's the name of it, Tony? The audit that we're talking about.
Accident review.
Which one?
The accident review.
Sorry, thank you. Accident Review Committee Rating and Prioritization. That's why I can remember. If I can ask that the audit committee consider putting it back on for 2026 in a certain kind of truncated fashion, just to be able to test the management process that's been put in place to be able to address. I think that we've heard that the data is coming in pretty strong. But for these kind of things, when they're taken off of the roster, which Tony and I go through, so I'm totally aware and okay with it coming off because we do have a management procedure in place. I think it also is good practice to close the loop, maybe the next year, to have almost a mini audit. You may not have to put so many hours into it, but just to make sure that the management approach that was selected actually solves the problem that was originally tested.
Yeah, and as a piggyback on that, if I might, so just so I understand the process across the board, not only for the specific audit, but just audits across the board. If the committee makes a recommendation and that recommendation is not accepted by management, that is the trigger to remove it from audit altogether? Is that what I'm?
No, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, that's fine, because, and forgive me, because that seems like what happened here, as in there was a recommendation made, management took a different route to address the same problem, and then kind of just fell off, and we're not necessarily auditing it.
Let me state this. When we issue a recommendation to management, we have a significant follow-up process because it's the risk that exists or does not exist that is the priority. All right, so if, in this case, if they have a different mitigation strategy than our recommendation, we will follow up and test it. So as Ms. Birdsong-Terry indicated, put it back on the plan. Our follow-up process for every audit and every recommendation is like a mini audit. Did you implement a control to mitigate the risk? And then if we find that it's not satisfactory, it goes back into our universe, and we will consider doing it, again, depending on we call that, you heard us earlier talk about inherent risk and residual risk. The inherent risk, if no controls were in place. Residual risk is a control is in place. What's the control risk? If the control risk is high, we're going to do an audit again. If the control risk is low, then controls are in place, working effectively, and we won't include that in our plan.
Okay.
I wonder just, Dr. Caver.
Please, first.
Well, I was just wondering whether it's also just the title itself might cause some confusion as to what it's actually covering. If it's training as a mitigation strategy, maybe it's the training, rating, and prioritization, something like that, that it makes it clear. This isn't all, I mean, we have a whole department that does analysis, so it might just be a little clearer on what we're actually talking about for this particular audit.
So let me interject, because I didn't mean to cause the stir this morning. I apologize. So as Tony was saying, we are doing follow-up on this open audit recommendation, and it's still in progress. We don't have final implementation yet. What I meant to convey was, because the strategy that management is using to mitigate the risk is different, we can't do an audit for something they haven't acted on. Something we want to work on, and in this audit committee environment, is how do we escalate to you scenarios where we think if management goes in a different direction, it's unacceptable risk that should be acted on, and this would not have been an item that we would say management has done something that is unacceptable and needs some oversight to change course. As Dr. Caver said, they have a strategy in place. It might be different than what we proposed, but it's not escalating to the level of we need to start directing or changing priorities, because we still have to evaluate that through the normal process like Tony described. We just can't do this particular engagement. So apologies for the framing of it when I first introduced it, but I hope that puts some members at ease.
And our escalation is we would certainly go to the deputy general manager, go to the general manager before we brought it to the board.
Dr. Caver, did you have?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a bit more context. I think as we've had the conversation, we've seemed to, let's talk about categorization and how we address risk from accidents. And so we have it's actually today, we have an executive safety committee meeting. And so whenever there's an accident, that accident is sent to the accident review committee to determine if it is preventable or not. Preventable, call it chargeable, that the operator did something wrong. Many of them, the operator didn't do anything wrong. Somebody rear-ended the vehicle, but it's still a collision for us. Those accidents then are sent to the risk management department under Janet, and they are categorized by the type. And we review the type of accidents, the tenure of the operators, the location of the accidents, and a myriad of strategies to mitigate accidents and collisions throughout the system. Certainly every month it is reported on, but every bus garage is looking to drive down their accident rate and the accident risk that they have. And so I just want to let you know that in our business, vehicle collisions is one of our preeminent risk factors, and there is a large amount of people here who are working to mitigate that, who know the accidents of where the accidents happened last month. If it's a construction zone, can we get the bollards moved back? We have teams that go out and place a reflective lighting on poles that we've hit because the pole in some portion of the city is leaning into the busway. And so I just want you to know that there's a robust categorization of accidents by their risk factor, operators by their risk factor, locations by their risk factor, and we do work to mitigate them. And I think Stephen said it, that it may have sounded like there was a clash between the audit department and the operating districts, but there wasn't. This was just a different way to come about reducing the risk that there was an elongated period of time between a person's accident and their true retraining.
I just wanted to thank you so much for the context and the clarity. And I think all the responses, Dr. Kaver, yours, Mr. Garofoli, CEO Birdsong Terry, I think that all your comments really help us understand just more about the organization. I look at these meetings as an opportunity to just like better understand the complexity of RTA. And this helps. So I wasn't asking the question about that particular one because I saw a problem so much as I wanted to understand the process, and this is very helpful. I will go back to CEO Birdsong Terry's suggestion. I think it's a good one, just to make sure. It sounds like you were going to do it anyway as a follow-up, but consider this item for a 2026 audit. But I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, carry on.
So then, there's no more questions about the proposed audit plan, then we will request that the audit committee approve our proposed mid-year plan for the remaining 4 months of the 25 plan year. That's November through February.
And you'd like formal action taken?
Yes, sir.
Correct, yes. Well, I'll go ahead and move approval of the proposed 2025 mid-year audit plan for the remaining 4 months of 2025 audit plan, November through February. Recommend that for adoption by the board. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, it passes, so it will go on to the board.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, now pivoting to our Quality Assurance and Improvement Program. So as a reminder, the QAIP, as it's known, enables an evaluation of internal audit activities conformed with the global internal audit standards, and then it assesses efficiency and effectiveness of the internal audit activity and helps us identify opportunities for improvement to make our processes more efficient and effective. So we've been presenting our KPIs now for 2 quarters in a row. This will be the third. And we wanted to shake things up a little bit about how we introduce this information, starting by really framing our KPIs as it's our tool for both performance management as well as continuous improvement. So we adopt the Plan, Do, Check, Act model of continuous improvement, where we define our goals, perform according to those goals, measure through our KPIs, and then identify corrective actions to help improve processes on a continuous basis. So today, I'm going to actually take us through each individual section to share our lessons learned as of Q3 for our KPIs, this being the first year we've been tracking and reporting them. And then we have 3 different categories of things that I'll share for each particular item. One being performance, so how might we change how we do things to find improvement in certain areas where KPIs might show opportunities for improvement. Measurement, improving how we measure our KPIs, because in some cases the KPIs might not be accurately assessing the reality of the internal audit function. And then implemented being scenarios where we might have already made some changes to how the KPIs are tracked, that we might see some results already. All right, so the first section is on the topic of audit delivery and efficiency. So starting with delivering the audit plan, again, this is a measure of audits completed over audits plan with an incremental target from Q1 through Q4. So already implemented, one of the things we've done is change the definition for what audits plan should contribute to a metric. So there are certain scenarios where there might be an audit, for example, of a construction project, where we know that that construction project is not set to finish until maybe 2 years in the future, 2027. So the question is, well, should that contribute to completion of the audit plan for the year? Under the current way that it's being measured, our stance was that that should be removed from the denominator because it's not a potential audit that can be completed in 25. However, I'll share something that might improve the way we measure audits plan that can account for that. So you'll see that for if we take that interpretation, some of our metrics have changed slightly from Q1 to Q2, and currently at Q3 showing 33% of audits complete for the year. Now under the topic of performance, we've identified some performance management efficiencies that we can utilize to help improve our completion of the audit plan. That includes resource leveling, ensuring that auditors are able to engage in many audits, especially when there are known downtimes, particularly related to periods between milestones where we might have met to do an entrance conference, but we haven't had the chance to actually execute field work, or we're waiting for an exit conference to share results. So making sure the auditors are fully resourced throughout the quarter, that's one of the activities that we'll be focusing on to improve for 26. But also for measurement. So we're looking to adopt an hour allocation model rather than the binary, is the audit complete or not? And the reason for that is there's inherent lag in the start of the audit plan year where we might kick off 10 projects in March, and all the auditors are going to go out and do their risk assessments, and they're going to complete their field work, and then we're going to report. And that could take up to 6 months to do. So for the first half of the year, it's going to be challenging to show progress on the plan if we're just saying what projects are complete. So what we're recommending to do in 2026 is how can we allocate how many hours have been completed for the balance of all hours in the plan. And that'll give us a better sense of progress throughout the year so that we can see how projects are progressing and get, to put it this way, credit for projects that have had significant progress but aren't yet across the finish line, to show that we're making progress on the plan and there's likely to be a large completion effort at the end of the year. So that's one of our recommendations for delivering the audit plan, how we might look at this metric in 26. On the topic of audit schedule adherence, something we want to do to increase performance in this area is revising our estimates for audit phase duration. So right now we have this challenge between how many audit hours it might take to complete an audit versus how many calendar days might be required to complete an audit, knowing that auditors might be subject to various delays just due to the nature of audits being highly collaborative with clients. So reevaluating our internal processes for forecasting projects. And then measurement, right now we're showing this by end of audit completion date, but we'd like to implement granularity by phase. So for the 3 major phases, the risk assessment, the fieldwork, and the reporting, are we on track with those individual phases? Because that's how we're tracking it internally. It's just not flowing through to the KPIs. And then report timeliness, something that's been implemented. Fast tracking is a project management principle where you can perform processes in parallel. This is where we would ensure that when we're trying to get through the reporting phase, for example, in addition to reviewing the field work, we're also starting to assemble the final audit report. And we've already implemented that, and we have seen an improvement in our Q3 data for days between field work and published date. Our target was 60 days, we're down to 77, and this is now showing with the year-to-date format. So Q1 is just audits in Q1, and the average days for that period. Q2 is just those audits, and then Q3 is just the audits that contribute to the Q3 data. So you can see a better trend of improvement in that particular metric. However, there was always ways to improve further. So our next step is to look at processes surrounding the management response, how long it takes to get a management response, because we can't publish the report until the management response is received. And I'll have some more content on that at the end of this section of our presentation. Before I move on to the next one, does the board have questions or comments? Because I don't want to just run through them all.
I had a brief question. I don't necessarily have anything against the hour allocation model, but I do, see the risk in you can spend a lot of hours on something and it might not be going anywhere. Have you thought about how you're going to handle that in terms of the plans?
Well, certainly when we see that as a performance indicator, you know, we have milestone meetings at the end of each phase of an audit internally, and we discuss, risks and delays and ways to improve, focus areas. So we're addressing what you're saying, but it's certainly a real question. We appreciate it.
As long as it's there.
I think the audit schedule adherence also gets at that risk. So
I was
if
thinking the same
hours
thing, yeah.
look, like according to target, but the schedule adherence is very poor,
Right.
then that'll show that we might have a lot of hours, but they haven't progressed to the
Right.
next milestone.
Which I assume you'll adapt to. As you go with this model, you'll adapt over time as you see those things varying. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because one of the other issues with the plan versus completed is, how do you, I could also have projects that only were 40 hours or 80 hours, and those are incrementing up our audits completed. They're not as impactful as a 300-hour audit. So this might show more effort rather than just arbitrary definitions between small audits, large audits.
That's true, yeah. Thanks, appreciate it.
Okay.
Any further?
Moving on. So next, under the staff development, so for training hours, so one of the, again, this is another one where we've shown now just hours per quarter with a cumulative year-to-date of 33 hours. So as you can see in Q2, that represents the period of time in which our professional organizations, whether that be the Institute of Internal Auditors, Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, or the ISACA Information Security, you got to help me with this one, Andrew, ISACA. Information Security and Controls Association, thank you. He's our CISA certified auditor, so that's his professional organization. All these organizations, they go on recess in that quarter. So what we want to do is identify webinar opportunities where we could supplement that to keep the continuous education going so that we can continue to accumulate hours in a more even fashion throughout the year. And then I want to implement more robust tracking per auditor. So right now it's sort of averaged based on things that we all attend, but some auditors, due to their different unique certification CPE requirements, might have to have more or less. And so different auditors achieve different balances of training over the years. So more robust training to ensure that we have some measure of what everyone's getting rather than just an estimate. And then finally, certifications achieved. This is one of those measures that's on most audit department KPIs, but it's also a measure that is unlikely to change significantly from quarter to quarter. So we want to continue to highlight, the achievement of our staff that have achieved these certifications, but maybe a different graphical representation for something that's going to be sort of static over time. Questions on staff development before we progress? All right, hearing none. Next is our client relations tracking. So again, year-to-date data is showing that both Q2 and Q3 of the client surveys received 100% satisfied. So the year-to-date then is the accumulation of all surveys to date. So under perform, we want to implement a year-end survey with unique questions for capturing cumulative perceptions of audit impact and client satisfaction. This is to get at a risk that was addressed by the board in previous committee meetings, and I think General Manager Terry also mentioned this. You might get different responses at the end of an engagement versus at the end of the year when there's been some separation from the actual audit activity. Maybe there's been some implementation of recommendations. Management might have been able to see some additional value now that processes have been implemented. So just another measure of client satisfaction, not just tied to the end of the engagement. Also might get better denominator of responses. And then under measure, consider revisions to the questions to obtain a clear vision of what is satisfaction. So I've shared in the past challenges with, well, how do you define what's satisfied? So revisiting the questions to see if we might take a subset of questions out that are driving the satisfaction metric so that other questions, while important, might not give us the clear image of satisfaction on the current survey. Questions on this before we move on?
Just a quick thought. I think that's a good point about trying to figure out what does satisfaction mean, right? Between collectively, between management as the customer almost. I would think satisfaction would mean, did we resolve the issue? Whether it's recommendation from audit or management response, whatever it is that gets to the end, did we effectively help get you to a better product, right? And so that might be a version of that question, to maybe even replace it with satisfied, because I think when people think satisfied, they want to please you, right? Not necessarily you particularly as a person, but generally I think it gets to the answer and it takes out the subjectiveness to it. And we say, hey, did we get to the end goal? Yes or no? And then you can kind of dig in from there.
Appreciate that. Thank you. And then this is the fourth and last section of the KPIs, issue tracking and follow-up. So under status updates, we want to perform more robust and transparent tracking and reporting on status update progress, particularly at these board meetings.
That's to Trustee Elder's question earlier.
Because we have different categories of status updates. So we have some projects that are advancing very quickly and implementing recommendations timely, and then we have some projects where status updates take a very long time to come through. It might be either because it's a particularly challenging area to work on, but it also could be because we might see some of that pushback from management on certain recommendations, depending on those particular recommendations. So having a measure where we could share with the board when risk starts to accumulate in a particular area, and we can say, hey, this issue has been open for quite some time, and we're stalling on it. Maybe we need some additional governance and oversight to help push those along. We want to provide that option to the board. So we're going to be looking at how can we improve that, and then we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation.
I'll give you an example. We make a recommendation, maybe it is complex, and we ask for an estimated implementation date, and now it comes time for that. It comes due, and rather than an implementation, the client says, can we have more time? So, we give them that extension, and then they come up to that extension again and ask for more time. Is one extension enough before you have to go to the general manager and ask for an extension? Should it go to the audit committee to ask for an extension? Different organizations do this differently. So in our place, we currently, we are making that decision. So we're looking at, should we engage the general manager? Should we engage the board in that decision?
And it starts with information, right? So that you'll know what is the population of status updates that might be delayed. And then issue closure. So something that's already been implemented is staff collaboration on closing of issues. So if a staff auditor or someone in the department completed the engagement and made the recommendation, they're assisting with that continuous follow where we evaluate whether that recommendation was implemented or not. Recommendations that are not implemented, we kick back to the audit client for implementation. And then in cases where they might say, well, we're going to accept the risk, again, that's where Tony said we've been internally deciding, okay, is that risk acceptable or not? Could we evolve to a position where we're sharing with the board, hey, this risk is high and it was accepted, and we need some determination from either the general manager or up. But one of the benefits of having the staff close out these issues is they get to see the full cycle of issue implementation, and it also helps them write, I think, better recommendations because then they see the process the clients go through to try to act on the recommendations that we write. And then, as I said, improvements to the methodology for tracking then closure and how we're reporting that information out. Any questions on issue tracking and follow-up?
Just a quick, and I think without getting into too much detail, I would probably also want to see how many repeat offenders that you've got, right? And that's part of the analysis too. Everybody always has an occasional blip, but if you've got some department, let's just say, that never responds, or if there's an evasion kind of issue going on where maybe the response is not ready and therefore it translates into a request for extra time, those are the kind of things that, should be red flags as well. My recommendation, just off the top of the head, and we can continue to kind of flesh it out, would be that the first also comes back to the audit. I think you're in control of whether an extension should be or could be granted, right? People have to also understand what their ability to negotiate within reason, right? An actual response date is. I've been in meetings where, 2 weeks is the standard and say, hey, wait a minute, let's get 30 days to make sure we make that time, so that I think there's an education process for some folks, but then keep them to it. Audit, I would think, has that control to be able to say whether or not that makes sense. If it's a high priority problem or issue, there might not be an extension available, right? I would imagine that the secondary would be me, and then Tony and I, or whoever's appropriate, we go through this on a quarterly basis. Before that, you say, hey, these are the red flags. We need to know, what can we do to kind of push a little bit. I would suggest if something comes in front of the board, my personal opinion is that this is not at the level of a board oversight. unless we're at a situation where there's something additional with it. Like there is a red ticket item that we are not getting satisfaction on any level. I would hope that we are never in that situation, but I would think if we have to come to the board with something like this, we've got a bigger problem.
Yeah, ensuring, this is kind of getting into now the theory of internal auditing and the governance structure. Part of this includes the idea that as an independent and objective assurance function, we have access to the board, but certainly India, if we're able to resolve things at the CEO level, then information at the board is for awareness, not for action.
Yeah, I'm looking at insubordination if you don't have a response. So I think we could be able to figure it out.
You know, and I do want to calm some thoughts. We're not there. You know, we have very good relationships with our, deputy general managers and managers, and we negotiate response dates and implementation dates for recommendations.
All right, and then we just have a general sort of improvement to measurement, and then an ability to see all the KPIs at once is, so we adopted the year-to-date measure as recommended at the previous quarterly meeting. However, some of the metrics as they were designed before the year-to-date was being shared are not really, they're not perfect for expressing a year-to-date value, particularly scenarios where you have snapshots. So some of these metrics, such as percentage of issues closed, average days, and status update, are more snapshots, and those are not as good at year-to-date evaluation as something like the average days for the end of the fieldwork, because I have discrete data on those versus this was a snapshot in time of where things fell. So likely in 26, then we're going to look at all the metrics and how the targets might be adjusted, whether they're expressed through numbers versus percentages versus averages versus what have you, so that then we can have meaningful year-to-date values, because even in some of these categories, the year-to-date is just what the Q3 number was. So just want to provide that for awareness.
Okay.
Quick question. Is there a industry standard, a gold standard for goals on some of the KPIs that we're trying to also look at and say, this is what the average is across the nation? And I know that's a really big question because we are not synonymous with a lot of different agencies. Everybody's different. But is there a target that you would be able to either surmise through APTA or any other organization where we say, hey, this is good numbers,
Surely, and that's part of the discussion we'll have next month when I meet with the other leaders from the public transit auditors. What we find is the areas are common, but the targets are unique to the organization. Some, for example, New York has 150 auditors, with their risk coverage. We have 8. So, it really varies, from agency to agency.
If there's no additional questions on the KPIs, we'll proceed. So then closing out the QIP section, just reemphasizing the II readiness assessment results that we present on quarter to quarter. So it is still our intention to publish the first theme report at the end of our quarter, which would be November. It just was not ready for this board meeting. So we will be publishing the audit theme report on customer experience, and that will satisfy our 11.3 update required for communicating results. We still do have 2 outstanding items, and these are items that are really critical to have charter approval for before we start acting on them. One being audit strategy and the other being the administrative procedure for management response, which again, it's highlighting this theme of how do we look at management responses throughout the whole life cycle, because these things really get at the governance and who do we escalate things to, and that sort of stuff is defined in the charter. So the audit charter being complete before we act on those items would be beneficial, otherwise they'd be at risk of revision once the audit charter was approved. And then for 2025, so every year we do an internal assessment to comply with our QIP requirements. So last year was the readiness assessment result. This year, we're going to be doing an audit on the management response process, right? So we've been talking about this throughout the QIP section. So measurement of management response timelines and the different content themes, the different types of responses that we get, evaluation of automation tools we have within our audit management system, Teammate Plus, for soliciting and recording management responses, proposed revisions to AP 006, which is our management response administrative procedure that defines timelines, and then design improvements for status update, tracking, and reporting, including at the board level. So this is what we intend to complete for this plan year, and we should have an update for you at the next board committee meeting. And I believe this is my last slide before I turn it over. So any more questions on the QIP before I transition to Molly O'Donnell, who'll take us through the rail car?
See none.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Good morning, Audit Chair Weiss, members of the Audit Committee, and General Manager Birdsong Terry. So we have the contract with Siemens Mobility, Inc., the base contract for 24 light rail cars, and now we have the 3 options for 6, 18, and 6 cars, the third option being recently approved, October 28th. We've previously talked about our pre-award contract compliance activities for the base and first 2 options. For the third option, we recently completed the pre-award Buy America review, and we are still engaging in our post-award contract compliance activities, reviewing project management and deliverables, and looking at contract administration and invoice reviews. As an update, as I shared, we completed the pre-award Buy America audit for the 6 car, the third option, the second and 6 car option. Management first article inspections are nearing completion, and major infrastructure upgrades are underway, including several construction projects that we have under audit that I'll share later. Here's a slide detailing the progress on the first article inspections. The remaining one is the communication software with Televic in Belgium at the bottom of that table. Here is the change order log that is maintained by our procurement department. The most recent change order was the change order for the 6 car option. We review payments to Siemens in GCRTA's financial management system, including change orders. The total contract amount is that $344.4 million item. We have paid $115.9 million as of October 29th. That brings us to 34% of the contract amount, and that has decreased. That last percentage item has decreased since the last time we shared it, just because of the new 6 car option being added to the denominator.
Just a note that there were no payments to the contractor during the third quarter.
Here are the other contracts that are involved in the bigger rail car replacement program. The ones in green are currently under audit, and we will be auditing other projects on this list once they reach the construction phase.
You can see that in those slides, many projects are in design. So as Molly just said, when they reach construction, we will consider them for audit depending on risk.
As we shared before, the FTA has assigned a project management oversight consultant, Ellis Gallegos. And internal audit management is actively engaged in those monthly meetings with the PMOC. If there are no questions, I'll turn it over to Stephen to discuss our third quarter activities.
One question I was curious, and maybe it was in the slide, maybe 4 or 5 back, about the number of visits. How often are we going out there? And it may be complicated because there are multiple contracts, but does this roughly reflect how often we're actually on site, or am I off base on this?
No, the, project management goes on site at each of these, at each of these dates or these time periods to do that first article inspection. Sometimes it's a team of folks. And as Ms. Birdsong Terry reported out, you saw a recent picture where they went out to the car show, and we had four representatives from the RTA go out there. So I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, just curious.
If I can ask, well, you guys are reading my mind. If I can, if I can ask Mike or Doc to be able to also advise on the frequency of the travel and what the expectation is over the life of the project. So I know typically we have a ramp up as we're trying to kind of get all of the bugs out of the first car, so to speak, as we're looking at inspection for car shells and painting and couplers and the like. Will that maintain through the duration, or will that also reduce as we get the first, second, third car in and are satisfied with what we've got? So if I can ask them, and then maybe, Tony, you can follow it back up.
Yeah, the first article inspection is a pretty important part of the review and acceptance of major parts and systems. So you will not see this travel repeated next year. There will be one more item next year, which is a trip to look at basically the first completed car before it's shipped. So that there'll be one more item in 2026. And on Mayor Weiss's question, we do have a full-time inspector in the plant as part of our contract with Hatch. And that is a construction administration function as part of that contract. So we do have a full-time inspector in the plant, and we're in communication with him quite a bit, in addition to our weekly meetings with Siemens.
Maybe just one last question. The FTA project management oversight monitor, are they out? How often are they out on site as well?
Actually, the PMOC has not been at the Siemens plant, but we are in, as Tony said, we're in a monthly standing meeting. As a matter of fact, it's usually the second Thursday of every month. So tomorrow is our standard meeting. They are more focused on the implementation of the build grant that we received and how we are managing risk and budget in the program. So we've expended the money from the build grant, but the build grant had milestones for delivery of vehicles. So they're on board to monitor how we are managing the contract to meet the milestones we had in the grant.
And no issues at this point?
No, I mean, it's again, they do look at the risk register because part of FTA's PMOC charge is to reduce cost and schedule risk and make sure that we are managing those risks as much as we can. And so we go over that with them every month.
You know, I wanted to add that as part of the post-delivery required audit that Molly mentioned in an earlier slide, it's required that a resident inspector is on site during the manufacturing final assembly process. So that'll be a combination of a contractor, and then members of the RTA will go out on milestone periods to inspect, resident inspection. Was it built per specification for each rail car? So it's actually an FTA requirement.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, we will now transition to the third quarter activities section of our presentation. So this is our standard format. Each of the auditors is going to take you through the completed projects we did this quarter, and everyone on the team has a completed project. Brandy's will come up in the continuous audit section, but we're very excited to share this information with you. I did want to highlight that 2 of our completed projects this quarter do have issues for board consideration. We present issues for board consideration when there is particularly high risk that was identified during an audit. We are going to highlight some of the strategic risk associated with that issue. However, the highlighting of these risks does not mean that there are not recommendations in place to mitigate them. So therefore, board awareness, management will implement our recommendations and follow up and drive the risk down, but we did want to share it with you as part of our reporting relationship function. And then after all the auditors go through their completed projects, I'll give us an update on the projects in progress, and then we'll proceed from there. This is just an updated chart. This shows the audit plan coverage by audit scheduled, reflective of the mid-year proposed. So it has not changed significantly, but that is a graphical representation of the distribution of risk coverage by audit topic area. And then this is our updated plan progress for the third quarter. And so then you can see now, compared to previous quarters, a significant number of projects that are in progress. Very few in reporting right now because many were completed this quarter, a large number in fieldwork, which we anticipate to will be completed by next quarter's presentation. All right, so I will now transition to completed projects, starting with Andrew Scott, who will take us through his audit on accrued leave.
Good morning again. Our first complete project for the quarter was an audit of our accrued leave with the objective to provide assurance over the controls in place to calculate, track, and roll forward accrued leave. Our scope was accrued leave control environment for all employee classifications and leave types, excluding compensatory time, as we performed multiple engagements in the last year specific to comp time. The audit touched on the themes of employee investment and IT governance, and the results were marginally unsatisfactory. There were several successful management practices. Due to, we manage multiple unions as well as non-bargaining staff, there's a slew of complex accrual rules, as well as the overall system configuration and controls were found to be working effectively. And when corrections were needed made to employees' times for various coding purposes, all of those changes were made in a very timely fashion. Recommendations that we had for this project include improvements to documentation of bargaining unit entitlements, which were negotiated in past memorandums of understanding, as well as any customized programming which is utilized for the correct accrual calculations. The next recommendations dealt with corrections to configuration, including the population of employees' continuous service dates. So that's when someone has previous service credit, their accrual dates are managed based off of that time rather than their date of hire. Logical controls for birthday accruals, as well as the configuration of user rights and access privileges. And finally, we had some issues identified for the correction of the manual adjustments. Though they were done in a timely manner, there was a subset of those adjustments that were not performed adequately. I will give it over to Laura.
Thank you, Andrew. Okay. Good morning, Audit Chair Weiss, committee members, General Manager Birdsong Terry. I'll go through my completed projects for the quarter. The first one is an audit of the customer complaints process. Our objective was to provide assurance over the customer complaints process, including inputs, assignment, resolution, tracking, reporting, and analyzing. The scope was the current process, and we looked at complaints received in June and July of 2025. The audit theme was customer experience, and our results were unsatisfactory. Also note that this department was reassigned to the customer experience department during the audit. Under management successful practices, we noted that the function was relocated within the CX department to implement improvements, and they are constantly working on that. So our recommendations were to update process governance documentation to reflect those organizational changes, revisions to the Connect with RTA webpage for improved issue routing, introduction of a live chat as a 311 feature, to empower the telephone information center staff to resolve common issues on the phone, create prioritization categories for issue investigation and resolution, and to collect data centrally for trends, patterns, and root cause analysis.
The live 311 feature, educate me.
So we noticed in our audit that a lot of customers text the transit police number for customer service issues. And they are really good at dealing with those, but that's not what that's meant for. So we recommended to introduce a similar feature just for customer service things.
Is that live chat a text feature as well, or is it?
That would be great. But, you know, this was just a recommendation for management to go with, and they could implement how they see fit.
In fact,
Yeah, and I'm only asking that because although our customers are obviously using a number that is not meant for the use in which they're using it for, it's interesting to note that they are texting and they are using certain modes of communication. So to the extent that as management looks at your recommendations, that they too can recognize that, and so that, you know, in hopes that we can actually implement something that the people actually want to use and find useful.
That number is 575 eyes for transit police, and that's a text number.
We also receive text messages on the fraud hotline from customers, you know, sending us complaints. So there, and I suspect that there are other, we call them input for the customers. So we're looking to centralize that. It becomes obvious to us that folks are texting, you know, a lot.
It's interesting. So all the numbers, I'm just curious, the numbers that we have, they all take in text, and where do they go?
Well, I can't speak for others, but with internal audit, we have a central repository that was set up for us with a database. And then once they reach that repository, there is an email that is sent to the audit staff that includes that text message and then allows us to respond.
Understood.
For the transit police one, they have a web service, and the dispatchers have the module open, and they can chat on their computers.
if I can, okay. I just want to make sure, because I know that we're going through this and going through it at a very detailed clip, and that's a great thing for conversation. We also have some newer folks to the process as well. I want to make sure that because we have the recommendations listed, these are recommendations by audit that have not necessarily been reviewed for implementation resourceability. So I don't want to give the impression that we're presenting a plan of action that is promised to be effective. These are wish list items with a lot of research behind it. So management has to be able to review. I would assume, and I'm very confident, that audit responds with recommendations that they feel are possible, but management has to review time, resource, availability, and the like, to make sure that we can actually move forward and that they actually match up with the plans that we have for alignment for the departments. So I just wanted to mention that. I don't want to get too far down a live chat and all of these options, and we may not be able to actually effectuate it. I will say that the audit team, I spent a lot of time with them, are very well versed in advising on what other agencies are doing. Sometimes those agencies are either further along or not as far along as we may be on the technology side or resource side. So we have to take all of that into consideration before we can say, yes, we can make that happen. But these are great recommendations, so I don't want to diminish that either. We appreciate that part. But just, again, to make sure so that we don't have board members walking away assuming that we're going to have a live text chat availability within a month or even at all. So I do want to make a quick note, because this is an important one. They all are important, but it was mentioned by audit that midstream, the department, which we now call customer care, that used to be called TIC, telephone information, is switched over to customer experience. So if I can just offer, if it's okay, Nick, I don't know if you had any comments, because there is quite a lengthy list of items that need to be cleaned up. I was part of this audit in the exit kind of debrief, and I think that it's important to note that this is not an easy cleanup as well. This has been kind of lingering for a while. I think the department has gone through some managerial challenges over the last years to be able to figure out how to really get to the crux and the root cause. So we're taking a different approach at trying to adjust it. So I just wanted to offer that as well. It's been a great conversation between audit and management.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, India. I'll just say very briefly, we really welcome the opportunity to merge with the Telephone Information Center and ADA registration team. So on our own, when we began that merger, we were doing pretty extensive current state observation and shadowing just so that we could have the direct firsthand knowledge of what they do. It coupled our efforts coupled really well with the work of the internal audit department, and so I think they'll talk later in this meeting. They did a substantial review of our customer complaint process, and so it's really layered. So it's looking at the work of the individuals who are fielding customer complaints in real time, and going all the way up to really the organizational level in terms of our approach to customer service. And so they gave us some great recommendations. Some of them are listed here. We're taking the opportunity because a lot of our observations validate their recommendations. So we're taking the opportunity to really go through this in like a formal project management methodology. So we have like a formal project management plan to go through this, review what we're capable of doing, and then implement the upgrading or enhancement of job titles India mentioned. So this aligns with what you're seeing here. So the group is now the customer care department. We're really leaning into how we can upgrade existing job processes to like the needs of our customers right now. So concepts like first call resolution, proper escalation chain, stuff like that. So it really couples here. You'll hear later, but there's more work with the ADA registration team. They're part of the same team, two chambers of the same team. And so I just want to say we really, welcome the efforts of internal audit, and it's helpful for us as we begin the process of improving.
Thank you all for that information. I just want to reiterate that, when we ask questions, it's not necessarily, to question what you've placed here. It is coming from a place of understanding. And so I hope that no one takes that as, we're making assumptions about anything, but, something mentioned here with quotes around it, or, that may be something that we don't understand. We're just seeking to understand where that recommendation came from, with the understanding that this is just that, a recommendation, and not anything that has been, vetted or even weighed in on by management. So thank you, and keep that in mind.
Okay.
My next completed project for the quarter was an audit of the maintenance management system upgrade. Just to refresh your memories, this is a system that we use to plan or track assets, plan maintenance on those assets, track their life cycle, forecast work, etc. So our objective for this audit was to provide assurance over the upgrade, validating whether project management controls are in place and effective, end user system requirements are implemented, system interfaces are operational, and reporting is reliable. The scope was the implementation from 2019 to 2023 of the new version 9. The audit themes were configuration management and IT governance. Our results were unsatisfactory. Management successful practices included the resilience of district equipment departments during the cutover from version 8 to version 9. So the issue for board consideration we bring to you is inoperable systems, unutilized modules, and reduced functionality. So several project deliverables remain inoperable, unutilized, or operable with reduced functionality. IT project management and end user department staff are working with the vendor to address these items all the time, constantly, every day. And JCRTA is experiencing disruption due to these issues. So we identified these strategic risks to make you aware. With operational, there's risk with maintaining our assets. That's revenue vehicles, non-revenue vehicles, and facilities. And financial, accounting for parts inventory and labor hours. With regulatory, we have state of good repair requirements from the FTA. And with IT, there are governance and change management considerations. Our recommendations for management were to implement a formalized project management framework for IT system implementations, identify and resolve remaining end-user challenges with the software upgrade, implement change management principles to ensure future project success, prioritize a train-the-trainer model for future upgrades to allow for better customization to the way RTA uses systems, and implement procurement training for GCRTA project management staff.
Maybe a little bit more background on the timing on the project. I mean, where are we actually in the, I assume there are different phases to the implementation?
This project started in 2019 before COVID, and it was supposed to be implemented in 2020 and go live. COVID delayed that. It was also delayed by a simultaneous Oracle upgrade. It did go live Halloween 2023, and since then they have been resolving issues after that. So the system is live and they're using it in day-to-day operations.
Okay, but not at full, obviously there are issues at not full capacity.
Yes.
Okay. I'm assuming there's discussion with management about the timeline for getting there.
If I could, just, can you help me understand how pervasive this is across the organization? Is it just affecting a couple departments, one department, the whole enterprise? Thanks.
The system includes different modules that impact many different departments, both in operations and then other departments that interface with those groups. So it is pervasive throughout the organization, which is why we raise the issues of strategic risk.
I'm just curious, are there, for lack of a better word, are there issues on our side on the implementation, or are there actual issues with the product itself?
There's both. There's issues of change management and implementation and configuration on our side. And then there's a number of outstanding system tickets with the vendor to be resolved.
If I can ask Doc to give a little bit of information. I'm not sure if Charles is close by, but if you can punt for him.
Good morning, Chair Weiss, members of the board. This is Fonse Caver again. This system is we call it our maintenance and materials system. So it's the work order system as well as the inventory system for all of our maintenance activity and asset information. So think when you go to a car dealership and it says that you had an oil change and there was one oil filter, there was 5 quarts of oil. We have that, but on steroids, given the types of vehicles and the complexity. As was mentioned, in 2019, we were made aware that we had to upgrade this system. I'll share that the system has always been a difficult system to implement, as the system was originally popularized for airlines. And so some of the business processes through the technology don't actually fit us. Certainly we make it work, and it allows us to continue to manage the system. We needed to upgrade it in 2019. We also needed to upgrade our financial management system, which is Oracle. This system ties into Oracle because it provides for us both the, I'm speaking in accounting terms, so I'll say it differently. We have the inventory items that are captured in there, so all of the parts in our inventory store. And when we complete a transaction, say we fix a part, we take the part out of the inventory and place it on the vehicle, it actually creates an expense. So these items are captured on our balance sheet as well as on our P&L. And so we needed to wait so that we could go ahead with an upgrade to Oracle in order to upgrade this. The reason we were waiting is that the system had some items that weren't easily fixed, but when we went to the Oracle system, we needed to upgrade it. We did so. The system still has some issues within it, but at its core, we're able to track parts. We're able to expense labor to maintenance activities, but there are some things that it hasn't been able to get fixed. We continue to work with the vendors in order to fix it. And at some point, we will go out for a new financial management system where one of our values will be to integrate in a single system the financial management system with the work order system. And so one of the risks that organizations have when you have various systems speaking to each other is that the crosswalk of information becomes difficult as vendors may or may not have certain relationships with each other. But our goal when we get to the replacement of the financial management system will be to look for the opportunity to have one system that collects all of that information without risk of things not working and then having to have workarounds to ensure that the financials are correct.
Is there a target date for that transition to a single system or not yet?
It's not there yet. We were looking for a closer date. Financially, we may be pushing that date out.
Okay. All right, other questions? All right, continue.
My last completed project for the quarter was an audit of the Windows 11 upgrade. Our objective was to provide assurance that the Windows 11 upgrade project was effectively planned and executed to ensure a secure and complete transition from Windows 10 prior to Microsoft's end of support date. That end of support date was October 14th, 2025, and the scope was all upgrade activities through that date. Our audit theme here was IT governance, and our results were satisfactory. Management successfully rolled out the Windows 11 upgrade across the authority before the Windows 10 sunset date, and they developed a contingency plan for devices that were not eligible for upgrade. And we had no issues identified. And I'll pass it over to Kylie Santola to talk about her projects.
Good morning, Audit Chair Weiss, members of the committee, General Manager, CEO Birdsong Terry, and guests. The project I will be sharing with you today revolves around the ADA certification process. So our objective for this project was to provide assurance on the GCRTA's paratransit certification process, including evaluating compliance with federal regulations, evaluating policies and procedures for processing applications, and to assess general certification office processes, risk, and controls. The scope was the current certification process, reviewing applications from June through December 2024. The audit themes were financial health and customer experience. The results were unsatisfactory. And similar to customer complaints, this department was reassigned to the customer experience department mid-audit. Management successful practices. The travel training program helps riders achieve independence on fixed route service and is in high demand. Issue for board consideration. We wanted to present this table due to strategic risk. I'll touch more on that on the next slide. There are a couple of stats that I wanted to highlight from this table. So in general, there has been a lack of referrals to functional testing and denials. We observed a significant number of approved applications with a low number of denials. The tests for the 2017 ADA certification process audit were reperformed in 2025. We were able to track the metrics for approvals, denials, and referrals to functional testing. I want to note for functional testing, when an application is referred to functional testing, usually management, the person approving the application requires more information to determine eligibility. So that is sent for a different process. On the table, there were a couple statistics that I would like to point out. So there were 299 denied applications during the 6-month sample range in 2017, compared to 8 during the 6-month 2024 sample period. There is a difference between the number of referrals to functional testing when comparing 2017 to 2024. In 2017, there were 350 applicants referred to functional testing. In 2024, the number amounted to 60. Additionally, I would like to highlight the difference between the number of conditional approvals following functional testing. In 2017, there were 68 conditional approvals and 0 during our 2024 sample period. Moving on to strategic risk. Strategic risk for operational is that there is a high demand for paratransit services. Financial risk is the cost of paratransit service, including purchased transportation and assets. Regulatory risk, service must be provided per FTA regulations for our entire client database. Reputational risk is the increased call volume and demand for service affects quality. For recommendations, we recommended that CX establishes departmental standard operating procedures and other improvements. System data is reviewed by management to correct data entry errors. Improvements to application review, including having a dedicated resource for ADA application review, implementing standards for application review, controls over personal care attendant assignment, improvements made to functional testing process and resourcing, and increasing travel training resources to meet demand.
There's a lot in here. I noticed, I think in some of the prior years, Mr. Garofoli, we would see sort of the status, discussions with management or so forth. I know I didn't see that in here on some of these, but maybe I'm comparing apples to oranges. But I guess the question is, where are we in the process of addressing or the management? And maybe it's more appropriate for Red Secretary.
Well, I'll say that over the years, there's been a number of organizational changes that impacted this process. There were more people. There was an independent contractor that did functional testing. We have one travel trainer who is very successful that Kylie pointed out. That travel trainer does a great job in showing folks how to use the fixed route service rather than depend on paratransit. So this is now being reorganized under the Nick Bigar's customer experience team and utilizing some of the resources that he has available. He mentioned it briefly, when he was giving his example of resourcing and improvements under customer complaints. So, this is the front door to eligibility. And when we're talking about cost containment, is to reserve the certification for folks who truly meet the criteria and are eligible for the service. So we recognize that, and we look forward to working with Nick, to support his process improvements.
So that's accurate, and I'll piggyback to that one. Nick, if I'm missing anything, let's do it that way, because I know we're running short on time. This is another one that was in the kind of exit interview that we had. I sat in on this one. You'll see a lot of these items that have multiple recommendations coming from audit as a deep dive into how to process map a little bit better. So it sounds a little odd, but I'm very happy with seeing this kind of deep dive into this item because it has been a little bit of a hot potato as we have gone through the process. And not to say we haven't addressed it, but the sweeping changes in ridership in paratransit and applications have been very volatile over the past, say, 5 years. Even thinking about the application and how to make that a little bit more accessible. Do we make that too accessible for folks? And then you have an over you have an onslaught of applications where they may not necessarily all be valid, but we are under that guise from the FTA to say you have to kind of accept all trips. But we also have to make sure that we're not giving people paratransit access when they could take the regular service. So all that being said, we are reviewing. I've requested that the language say resourced instead of staffing. If you look on, I think it's the last bullet for travel training, because we do have one travel trainer, and typically that's Elisa Murray, who falls under Natoya's group, is not necessarily the ADA eligibility specialist, and we want to be able to take that function and really resource it with additional people. So Nick's team is looking at cross-training for different departments to be able to kind of pinch hit through that. So we have a larger roster of folks that would be able to do that. I want to say 3 or 4 years ago, I'm looking at Natoya when I'm saying this, Nick Davidson, who is our paratransit director, and several other folks, we talked about the idea of taking the resourcing for this in-house versus the external source that we had, that we saw in the numbers that was on the previous slide that were a little bit unwieldy, which really indicated that we weren't saying no to anybody. And when you have that, that is a red flag as well, because that makes you think, are our standards actually where they need to be, and what goes into the process? So long story short, we're reevaluating how we address this. This is another one I think it's going to be an ongoing and kind of circling back to see if what we're doing has actually helped with the process. To Mayor Weiss's point, did we have something in the format where we said conversing with management or continued, and that might be missing? I think that's where I see some of the confusion, to say we have a lot of recommendations, but then are we closing it out? Are we opening it back up? Are we missing a piece?
So I'm not aware if there was a format exactly addressing that in previous quarters, but what we're trying to work towards, and we talked about earlier in the presentation, is this might be the last time under the current format that you'll see the completed project, right? We present the completed project, the recommendations, and it's gone. By implementing a more robust status update reporting framework, which we're looking to do, then we can start to track things into the future, and then we might be able to say, okay, for this particular audit, all recommendations have been implemented or closed out. And then we can provide, and then we do our check and make sure that the recommendation implementation mitigated the risk. So it's a continuous feedback loop of assurance. That's an immediate future improvement that we're working on.
Yeah, I remember discussing in prior meetings where you have a system that tracks all of the follow-up recommendations, as I recall.
It does, and it provides management an opportunity to give us a status as they close in on the agreed-upon implementation date. And then, as Stephen said, we don't close out an issue until either the risk is gone, management accepts the risk, or they've implemented an agreed recommendation.
You may want to think about whether there's some report out that just says, here's, and I know the numbers may be big because we have lots of audits over the years, but you know, here are the number that are come into the system, here are the ones that have been resolved and been completed and are off the list, and you know, how many continue on.
We have an aging schedule, and we can definitely provide that.
Yeah, I don't want to get people buried with data or too much documentation or too much information, but I think something that would just sort of track how those are progressing, particularly the ones that are noted as unsatisfactory. Obviously, want to see how we're proceeding on those.
Well, just to add to your thought, you know, we evaluate, as I said earlier, control risk post-audit. So that'll set the priority for us. So we have some recommendations that are high priority, medium priority, low priority, and that's part of our aging schedule.
One thing, if I could just add, I will say I expect there always to be something that's unsatisfactory on this list. And this is really a testament, I think, to us digging into the things that need to be fixed. So I just wanted to say thank you again to Audit for really digging in, and thank you to management for really wanting to tackle. We always have things that, you know, need to be fixed and aren't a perfect situation. But I think this speaks to the transparency that we have in-house to be able to say, hey, we have a problem here. Excuse me, let's go ahead and address it. So it's kind of like the bad news is good news in a way.
And we also select the highest risk issues to look at. So they're subject to criticism.
My criticism will come when there's nothing on the audit and it says it's all satisfactory. I'll probably call Tony and say, wait a minute, let's look at, a couple other things.
Okay.
All right, I'm now going to hand it over to Molly O'Donnell to share her completed project.
Our objective for the fiber optic line replacement construction audit was to provide assurance over engineering project management controls. Our scope was project management activities from notice to proceed through final completion. This audit's theme was community impact, and the results were marginally unsatisfactory. For management successful practices, this project experienced a variety of pandemic-related supply chain and schedule challenges, and our project manager overcame them all for a successful project delivery. Our recommendations, we recommended management adopt some improved resourcing to assist with tracking and record-keeping activities for construction project management. And then we issued a recommendation to ourselves on this audit to evaluate the outage request process through an internal audit that Laura's working on right now. I'll turn it over to Darren to discuss his projects.
Just one real quick question. Is this internal use fiber optics, or is this also as part of the development?
This was a major replacement of the network through the red line, connecting stations and buildings. It was a significant fiber optic replacement.
All right, thank you, Molly. Good morning, Audit Chair Weiss, members of the Audit Committee, General Manager, CEO Birdsong Terry. This is one of my completed projects, student operator overtime. The objective was to assess the integrity and completeness of the data workflow from Hastis to Kronos and eventually into Oracle, and evaluate how student operator overtime is recorded, reconciled, coded, and interfaced across systems. Our scope was overtime that was earned in 2023 and 2024, and also the implementation of pay codes in 2025. This project tied to the audit themes of employee investment and financial health, and the results were unsatisfactory. Some are a management successful practice, payrolls exceptions, reporting, and IT system administration activities led to discovery of this issue. And our recommendations were the verification of overtime payments during that time period, so 2023 and 2024, establish an overtime policy for students, and then also follow up on how Hastis has students configured within the system. And then my last completed project is GCRTA's travel and expense reimbursement. The objective, internal audit reviews all trip reports and travel expense reimbursements for compliance with policies and procedures. Our scope, we review 100% of all trips that employees take and the corresponding expenses. And the results, the travel reports have been compliant with policy. Any that are non-compliant get returned to the travelers for corrections and then get re-reviewed by internal audit before we submit them for processing. And with that, I will turn it over to Stephen to discuss projects currently in progress.
Thank you, Darren. We're running a little long on time, so I'm going to go through quickly, but if the board has questions about any particular projects, and you have the slides in front of you as well, please stop me. Just to highlight some projects that are new this quarter, things that we've kicked off since our last meeting will be highlighted in green, one being capital improvement planning cycle. We're going to be tracking the capital improvement planning process from submission from managers and directors all the way through to board approval. So we're engaged in that audit now as RTA is going through their capital planning process. We have engaged that healthcare claims expense co-sourcing. Tony we'll talk about that a little later. We're going to do a nepotism self-disclosure file audit because all employees are required to submit their self-disclosures during open enrollment. And then as Molly referred to, the outage request audit has been kicked off for this quarter. We have a lot of projects in fieldwork. Many of these transition from planning to fieldwork this quarter. And we're making good progress on all of these projects and expect most of these, if not all of them, to either be in reporting or completed stage in the next quarter. And then there's only 2 projects in reporting because so many projects were completed recently, and these are both progressing on time. So we also separate out the projects that we do from our construction basis because these often, as I said earlier, take a very long time. Some of these construction projects might not be complete until 2027. So this is a mix of projects that are both railcar related and non-railcar related construction engagements that we are currently under audit and the phase that they're in. And just some information on the construction budget, including cost orders for your information. And then we also have an update slide on the Buy America activities. We completed the Buy America for the Siemens 6 car option. We're planning to do the domestic content monitoring. And then we're currently planning or in progress on the post-delivery for both the paratransit coaches as well as the CNG coaches. All right. If there's no questions on projects in progress, I'm now going to turn over to Randy Bowles, our IT specialist auditor. He's going to take us through continuous auditing.
Okay, continuous auditing is just a method of utilizing a series of scripts to perform auditing activities on a more frequent basis to identify risk and any exceptions for investigation by appropriate staff and management. And I'm not going to go through the 7 steps. But the thing that we want to point out here is with continuous audit, unlike traditional audits, it does analyze 100% of the transactions. And this is just a list of all the continuous audits that we do. And for sake of speed, I'm not going to read through all of them, but they're done monthly, most of them. And then paratransit is done annually. And the fuel expense is a new one that we just added that's done quarterly. And then this slide here is revenue. This shows like fare box collection, in-station cash, credit, mobile revenue, and it's a year-to-date chart through September. And all of it is under the 2% variance, which shows the tolerable rate between fare box and what is deposited to the bank. And it essentially shows that all the money is collected, counted, deposited, and posted to GL, and we're still working on mobile development, and I think we're starting to get close. Purchasing card, it's a chart that shows year-to-date purchases, and the bar across the top shows third quarter data. It shows the total, average, highest number of purchases, and we have a series of tests that we do, and I've said this before, but just because something gets flagged by one of our tests, it doesn't mean anything is wrong. We sit down once a month, we go through it. If something stands out, we pass it on to management for review. Payroll, the chart highlights the dollar volume for quarter 3, and it shows 3 groups for bargaining, FOP, and non-bargaining. We analyzed 6 periods, 41,674 records, and a total compensation like $41 million. And again, the same with the chart before. We have a couple of tests that we look at. Doesn't mean anything's wrong, but we sit down once a month, we go through them. If we find anything wrong, we pass it on to management for review. And this is the new slide that we have, a new continuous audit for diesel and gasoline. It shows the number of drops. That's essentially a truck shows up, they drop it into a tank, the number of drops that we do, the average, and the total spend. And some of the tests that we do are fuel rate validation and tax validation. And there's a lot of rates. There's contract rate, which changes yearly. The OPIS rate changes every day. The Superfund, I think that's quarterly. Activity, spill, lust, and excise. So we research those rates independently, store them in a database, and then run some scripts, and it produces results. And these are the continuous audits that are in development. Fuel expense we completed. Compensatory time, we're looking at an end-of-year rerun. Mobile ticketing, I already said that's still in development. And then dependent eligibility is deferred. Dashboards is still in development, but all the charts that I showed you came right out of our dashboards. And with fuel expense that is complete, I do have one that I want to add to this chart that's not on here. I'm meeting with someone, I think Friday, for CNG. I think with CNG, I think we can do a continuous audit on that. And ongoing technology project. That's no now.
So as Randy alluded, the continuous audit process, it's always continuously evolving. So like he said, the CNG will be incorporated into that fuel expense. We're waiting on access to a single file from our mobile ticketing vendor to complete the credit card-based mobile ticketing reconciliation before we then move into the stored value account and can start working on the fare capped aspect later next year. So Randy is constantly evolving his scripts, on a month-to-month basis. So quickly, just to go through some other ongoing technology projects. Most of these are covered throughout the rest of the presentation. But we have the enhancements to our bid dispatch system for tracking operator absences. We have ongoing disaster recovery efforts. We have the upgrade to the paratransit scheduling system. The recent upgrade was completed, and the group is looking to implement the Uber-like app in Q1, Q2, 2026. Tony and I, again, maintain our seats on the IT Council with Doc, Raj, Josh Miranda, and Charles Morgan. During those, we discuss all of our governance items. So we've worked through the finalization of our internal AI policy. As enhancements are made to other governance items such as project management, change management, and the likes, those will continue to flow through the IT Council for modification and approval. And that's also where we track any external recommendations from the state or from federal partners. As mentioned earlier with the topical requirements, we continue discussing cybersecurity. Again, we track those from recommendations with our federal partners. And then just some other projects that we, keeping our ear to the ground on. So the Management Information Services, new robotic process automation initiative, upgrade of fluid management systems. There's a procurement and development for an updated learning management system. We have the deferred applicant tracking system, various infrastructure updates. As Doc said earlier, we are looking to replace our enterprise resource planning system. We've gone through a procurement with that, and we're waiting on some final steps. And then again, the fare updates. There is the procurement out for the ticket vending machine, account-based ticketing, and fare capping, looking to be rolled out in Q2 of 2026. With that, I will give it back over to Tony.
Okay, rounding out our presentation. A special request and emerging issues that come into the office. These are older and will be coming off in the fourth quarter, continuing to work with our insurance company on their subrogation efforts with the diverted payment that happened last year. And then working on some final audit steps for a change directive, which was for our West 117th Rapid Station. Nothing for board consideration. External audit coordination, one of our responsibilities. You are aware that in June, the state auditors reported out on the financial statement audit for 2024, and that report was issued July 9th during the quarter from the state. And although we have not received an engagement letter yet, we expect that they'll be joining us within the next couple months to do some interim work. They will be doing the work themselves. We continue, as Molly said earlier, we continue to work with the Project Management Oversight Replacement Program, PMOC. We spent a lot of time talking about outstanding follow-up. Mayor Weiss has asked for some trend analysis, which we can prepare for the next audit report. But as I said earlier,
we do track all outstanding recommendations until the risk is no longer there or until implementation. Other projects. At the last board meeting on Tuesday, there was a request for appropriation for additional $9 million on healthcare. Lots of comments about cost containment. And I thought I'd spend a little bit of time talking about the authority's efforts with cost containment for the healthcare program. As others have mentioned, we did engage TFG Partners out of Pittsburgh to help us with a claims audit. They are engaged in working with us. And some of the things that we will be working with them to accomplish, validating claims accuracy, eligibility compliance, is everyone who's in our roles appropriate, adherence to the plan benefit rules, reconciling claims with the amounts of monies that have been spent by the authority and the eligibility data. Certainly we have plans, healthcare plans, where the claims processed and adjudicated in compliance with our individual plan designs, benefit limits, and looking for things like duplicate payments made that the third-party administrator may have made to a doctor or to a hospital. Our contract with our third-party administrator we have an administrative agreement where we have to pay some fees on top of the amounts we pay to support those claims. Did we pay the appropriate amount of those fees, okay, in accordance with that agreement? And then, all said and done, we'll have a report of our findings that we'll share with management and this board, and there'll be some process improvements that we will identify that will inform the next plan. So in 2026, management will will issue a request for proposal as the current agreement with our third-party administrator is expiring at the end of 2026. So we hope to be in a position to inform them with some lessons learned so they can look at some cost containment and potential plan design upgrades. Other projects that we have, certainly our fraud hotline. Andrew mentioned our IT council. We're on the change order review committee. We've talked about in the past. Molly mentioned about the rail car program. I'm a member of the steering committee, our records management committee, and then as new employees orient to the authority, we have a presentation for each group. As Stephen mentioned earlier in our metrics, we have some requirements to maintain our licenses and certifications. These are the types of trainings that we had during the quarter. We try to utilize our local chapters to keep the price down. And that concludes our presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions, and I appreciate that my staff is well informed and supported me here today.
Great, thank you. Questions from the board? All right, I'm seeing none, but I appreciate all the work that obviously goes into each one of these. And I know we went maybe a little longer than normal, but I think it was important to touch on things that the board has questions about.
Thank you.
So we appreciate your efforts on that front. Is there anything else, Mr. Garofoli, on the agenda for today?
No, we'll be working on our quarterly report that we'll present to the committee of the whole board. I'm hoping for Tuesday, but I may ask for an extension so that I can complete the report.
Okay. All right. Terry, anything on your end?
No, this is great. I appreciate all the questions, all of the robust conversation. This is what we're here for, so it's great when we have these kind of deep dives. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. We stand adjourned.